Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a field-forward podcast.
The number one selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio for the last decade, and I'm excited to start up this podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today I'll have a conversation with Krista Swanson, the National Corn Growers Association, about global impacts on corn demand. I'll also cover the latest planting and crop progress updates with Central Iowa agronomist Meaghan Anderson of ISU Extension. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast and our social media at Field Forward. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks in Iowa informed about what is affecting our farmers, all here on Farm Here Daily. Again, joining us, we have Krista Swanson, Chief Economist of the National Corn Growers Association. Krista, thank you so much for joining us today, and let's talk about some of those potential impacts on corn demand, including the very recent UK deal. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so we just got a new trade agreement with the United Kingdom, and this is just a really positive sign of momentum. This agreement increases access for American agricultural products, including ethanol. So the United States already does export some ethanol to the United Kingdom, but as part of this announcement, tariffs on that would be reduced to zero for up to 1.4 billion liters of ethanol. And the White House has put out a fact sheet that shows that this opportunity represents up to $700 million worth of U.S. ethanol exports.
Why does the UK seem interested in ethanol now? I haven't heard of them being a huge importer of our corn products.
Yeah, so like I said, they already were importing some ethanol, but I think just, this opportunity where they're working with the president on, changing some of those tariff rates allows for greater ethanol imports. And, a lot of nations are utilizing more ethanol in their blending rates. And so, that's just like the United Kingdom, there's that opportunity in other nations as well.
Alongside this UK deal was some notes surrounding India as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about our trade prospects there?
Yeah, so I think what's really great about the United Kingdom deal is that we have a lot of indicators from the president that there's no intention of stopping there. And so like India, there's other nations that we have more opportunities, and we have been focused with corn on the opportunity in India with its 1.4 billion consumers, just could be a really major market for corn growers. And so we looked into some of the economic data to see how the Indian market could benefit corn growers, and there's some really impressive numbers. I guess I'll just start with corn. India is a big market for corn, but they have some restrictions on genetically modified corn. So it's not a market that we can access, not because of tariffs specifically, but this is an example of a nation that has some of these, what we call non-tariff trade barriers, where they have regulations that prevent that. And so, this is an opportunity to open the door to potentially, $235 million worth of U.S. corn exports. Just to put that in perspective, over the last few years, we have only exported 2% of their what they're total importing in India. The U.S. is only filling about 2% of that market, and so there's just huge potential if we could get over some of those barriers. And then there's also opportunities for ethanol and DDGs. I'll speak to ethanol just a moment here. Not only has India recently scaled their ethanol blending rate into motor gasoline up to 20%, so that there's this growing need for more ethanol. But they also have plans to really ramp up sustainable aviation fuel. So there's that combined opportunity as we look out over those future years, 3, 4, 5 years down the road as well. And we've done some calculations to look at that, and in some of those years when they've developed that sustainable aviation fuel market, we could be looking at $434 million opportunity for U.S. corn farmers.
Another country that is an established trading partner, especially when it comes to corn, primarily because of the logistical aspects of them being unable to produce their own corn stocks, is Japan. And Japan has a bilateral trade agreement with the U.S., or did have a pretty established one from the last Trump administration. What is the status of that now?
Yeah, so Japan, as you noted, the lack of domestic feedstock in Japan means there's just a lot of market opportunity there, and we want to make sure that we can be a part of that. They are growing their blending rate as well. When I say that, I mean their ethanol blending rate into their motor gasoline, and they also have sustainable aviation fuel production goals. So, I think we already have an agreement there, and so that established relationship is really positive as we think about the opportunities. The U.S. is already exporting ethanol into Japan, but there's greater opportunity there that we could still have space to increase. And then similarly for corn, Japan is already a large importer of U.S. corn, but certainly more opportunity there too. And I think one positive, back in February, there was a press conference between President Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister, and increasing ethanol exports to Japan was specifically mentioned in that press conference.
We are speaking with Krista Swanson, Chief Economist of the National Corn Growers Association. Krista, before I let you go, I would be remiss not to talk about the latest World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates numbers that came out on Monday. I mean, you are the Chief Economist, so I'm sure you have plenty to talk about as you look through some of those numbers. What really stood out to you from this latest WASDE report?
Yeah, well, I think what stood out to me is I'll just summarize it with the word record. There was a whole lot of record projections as we look ahead. This was USDA's first look at the 25-26 marketing year in season, and we have projections for a record 181 bushel per acre yield, which that was a carryover from the February Ag Outlook Forum, so not necessarily a surprise. But when we pair that with a really large expected planted area, we're looking at a record 15.8 billion bushel production. I'll note too that global corn production projection would be a record production if realized. So that's why I'm kind of going with the word record here. We have a lot of record, if these projections come to fruition, looking at not only a really big U.S. crop, but also a large global crop. But I will say one positive as we, think about what kind of a position that puts us in, although we have that global record production, global consumption is also projected to keep pace and actually results in lower global ending stocks under this report. The U.S. kind of breaks from that pattern with higher ending stocks But still a stocks to use ratio that a little higher than last year, but, similar to the year before. So, that were some of my big takeaways as we look ahead. I think one thing to keep in mind is that we're still a few months from even getting into the 25-26 marketing year. And as we've been talking about with what are these situations on the trade front, there's a whole big spectrum on the trade front of what maybe we could expect over the next 15 months as we look ahead to the end of that 25-26 marketing year. A lot can still change.
Right. And, it's funny you mentioned that because we are about that time where there is not really much left for farmers to do when it comes to some of these prices going up or down in corn or beans in regards to swapping out if they're choosing to plant corn or beans. And is that settling factor going to be at play here as we look at some of these trade movements and trade disruptions even?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw, several months where that corn to soybean price ratio was certainly favoring planting corn acres. I think that's why back in March, farmers told us they were going to plant 95.3 million acres of corn and soybeans down from the year before. There's certainly when you enter planting season, there's certainly some of those swing acres, but there's also a lot of other factors that go into farmers' decisions on what to plant, as far as will there be will the fact that that corn to soybean price ratio has changed here in the last several weeks, where now is not as strongly favoring corn. Will that shift any acres back to soybeans? I think that's left to be seen, but I think the weather also has the final say. And what's kind of interesting when we look at planting progress so far this year, and we see it, kind of being on normal pace. But we have this anomaly where there's certain pockets, just using Illinois as an example, where there's a lot of, in northern Illinois, a lot of farmers are done planting. But then you have that southern Illinois strip kind of goes across southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, where there's a lot of farmers that haven't planted much. And so, as we move past the optimal window for corn planting, we could see weather also have a say in whether some of those acres go back to, soybeans, maybe if they were leaning corn. So anyway, I think that a combination of maybe price and weather will be interesting to see if that makes a difference when we get those June acreage numbers.
We are speaking with Krista Swanson, Chief Economist of the National Corn Growers Association. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, thank you. Happy to talk.
This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast, and we'll have some more conversations on the way, but I did want to take a look at the closing market numbers for this Tuesday, and it was a bit of a mixed trade. May corn down 4 1/4 cents, $4.36. July falling 5 1/2 at $4.42 1/2. Soybeans in May, a penny and a quarter stronger at $10.67 1/4, with July rising a penny and a quarter at $10.72 1/2. Soybean meal in May down $5.20 a ton at $285.90. May wheat 2 1/2 cents higher, $5.01 1/2, with July rising 2 cents, $5.17 1/4. In livestock market close for Tuesday, June live cattle down $0.50, $216.32 a hundredweight. August rising 2 cents at $211.62. Feeder cattle in May down 27 cents a hundredweight at $302.82, with August down 37 cents at $306 even. Lean hogs in May 25 cents a hundredweight more at $90.97, with June up $1.20, $99.50 a hundredweight. That is the Tuesday market close. This is the Farm Here Daily podcast.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Meaghan Anderson, ISU Extension agronomist for Central Iowa. Meaghan, thank you so much for joining the program again. Glad to talk to you, as always, about planting, crop progress, and all the works involved. What have you been doing today?
Well, I've been out in the field for most of the day, checking out some corn and some soybeans, sort of through the middle of my territory anyway, just to see how things are progressing and looking at a few different pests out in the field, but not too much. Stuff looks really good overall so far.
Now, it's pretty hot. We got a bit of a heat wave coming out through the Midwest. How's some of that early emergence affected by the heat?
So overall, emergence looks pretty good, especially on the corn side now. I'm seeing a little bit of effect actually of some of the cooler temperatures earlier and maybe some of the rain that things are in some parts of fields are just struggling to get through a little bit of leafing out underground. But the corn has really well established roots now and actually is probably not minding this heat too much, right? A little early heat is not really too bad for most corn fields. Soybeans, on the other hand, right, we're seeing some pretty severe crusting issues, right? The topsoil's drying out, especially in fields that have been tilled. And so I am seeing some problems where it looks like they're still struggling to come through a little bit. It always amazes me how long it takes all the soybeans in a field to emerge. That, most of them can be emerged 4 weeks out, and we're still seeing some of them trying to poke through. And so those beans, some of them are struggling a little bit to get out of the ground. And then some of them that are out of the ground in some of these fields, maybe they're shallow planted, maybe they have their water robbed a little bit from some cover crops or something else, but there's some of them that they're just looking a little bit wilty, and so I think that they're maybe not quite loving the heat so much right now, and we could really use a good drink of rain across all of these fields, I think.
I was going to ask about that because we've gotten some pretty good rains for the last month, but not necessarily as much in the last week.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes the solution to having too much rain early is that we need to get more rain to help solve some of the problems that the earlier rain caused. And so, yeah, it's been really warm, very low humidity, very dry in our fields. Topsoil is really dry. So, yeah, a little bit of rain would be great right now.
In terms of planting progress, we talked a little emergence. How much do you think farmers here in Central Iowa have left?
Man, I think we are really close to being wrapped up. There's not too many people that are out planting still, though there is quite a bit of field activity happening just because the weather is so nice right now. So I saw a couple planters out today. I saw some tillage still happening. So there's a little bit of field prep yet to wrap up. So hopefully here in the next few days, we can hopefully put a closure on planting season for a lot of folks anyway. And I already saw some guys out spraying post. And so I think mostly that was in fields that didn't have any pre on them. But I am seeing quite a few weeds out in the field. So I think it'll be no time before we see a lot more field activity from the sprayer aspect as well.
We're speaking with Meaghan Anderson on Farm Here Daily with us. She is an Iowa State University Extension agronomist in Central Iowa. Meaghan, the folks at Extension Services put out a cutworm moth update every week, and I looked at that, and there was a bit of a jump from the week before. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this spring we don't have nearly as many moth traps out as we typically do, but we have several of them out across the state, and we have seen some pretty high numbers, as well as Missouri and Illinois have both been reporting really big numbers of black cutworms also. And so we, I think it was just last week, put out the alert that those cutting dates are probably going to start the end of this week, that those, the moths fly up to Iowa. They lay their eggs in fields that look like they would be good food sources for hatching larvae. And so once those caterpillars hatch, they can feed on corn plants and on soybean plants, but they have to reach a certain stage before they're big enough to cut corn plants off. And by the end of this week, they probably should be big enough to cut those corn plants. And so we'll really want to keep an eye out for that. I have seen some of what looks like black cutworm feeding, where it's it's a really symmetric shot hole across the early leaves of the corn plants. No cutting of plants yet because they're not probably big enough, but I would expect that we may see a little bit of injury in some fields next week.
When it comes to pest pressure and pest problems, have you had any calls over the last week or so from farmers wanting some thoughts on things they found?
Yeah, primarily questions about weed management. I feel like we're seeing some of these pre's break a little bit earlier, or maybe we missed some rain or something when we put those pre's on, and so we're seeing some more weeds come through than maybe we did last year when we had more consistent rainfall after that kind of first early planting flush. And so a lot of questions about timing of herbicides, switching herbicide programs, right? They were planning on doing a pre, but now maybe they need to do something that's going to kill emerged weeds as well. And so a lot of that's happening. Not too much on the insect front, though I expect that to continue to pick up here, especially as we get into next week, as this crop gets a little bit bigger and maybe we see some of this activity from these moths that would have flown up to Iowa earlier this spring.
I think that's an important question to touch on. If you have a farmer who has one of those pre-emergents on and maybe it got washed out in some capacity or it's not being as effective, do you have any resources at ISU Extension to consult on what another option may be if you are seeing those weeds pop through?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got our weed control guide that's got some good information on kind of what herbicides will control certain target species, whether it's with a pre-emergence or if we have to come back post. Obviously, water hemp is a huge target for us. We saw water hemp come through already at the end of April in some fields that hadn't been sprayed. And I've seen water hemp this week in fields that were sprayed a few weeks ago. And so we're going to be out there needing to control water hemp sooner rather than later. And unfortunately, that list of effective herbicides just is not nearly as big as it used to be. So our options post-emergence are pretty darn limited, especially when we need to be out here this early. We may see more water hemp come through even after those posts. And so we need to be thinking about that when we plan those post-emergence applications, because we may need to be looking at putting in maybe residual when we haven't, or changing up those residuals in a way that we maybe haven't in past years.
So it probably sounds a bit like a broken record, but crop scouting is then very vital.
Absolutely, right? It always is, especially this time of year. It's important to be out there checking on those crops as they emerge, making sure that your stand is sufficient, because we're still within that early plant window here for a couple more days anyway. And then checking on those other things, right? Looking for the insects, making sure that your weed control is working the way that you expect it to, and getting an idea of when you need to be out there in that field again.
Meaghan Anderson, ISU Extension agronomist in Central Iowa. Are there any ISU Extension field days that are on the way here post-planting in Central Iowa that you'd like to make mention, and or are there any resources you'd like to double check and make mention of for farmers to go check out during this time?
Well, for sure, our herbicide guide is a great resource as people are looking at either applications in row crop fields or even in pasture and hay, right? Trying to clean up some of those early weeds that we see in hay fields or in pasture ahead of the summer. And then we are going to have a post come out probably this week announcing a whole host of field days across the state that'll be happening this summer. The one that I know for sure will be happening in Central Iowa is we will be having the return of our weed science field day. That's going to be on July 2nd. So just ahead of the 4th holiday, and we'll be highlighting some different herbicide programs, successes and failures, talking about new technologies in weed management, and a lot of other stuff with our new weed scientist.
I'm just going to take a wager that if you go to that, you might get a bit of an edge on all the other folks at the Iowa State Fair for some of those weed judging competitions.
Oh, maybe. I can't say one way or another, but I do recommend people show up, especially if they want to compete at the State Fair.
Wonderful. Again, Meaghan Anderson, Iowa State University Extension agronomist in Central Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Thanks for having me, David.
We appreciate having you on. Thank you. And thank you to everyone listening, joining us here on Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Again, in order to keep producing this type of local Iowa content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast, as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod on X specifically. Again, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports. You can also see me on TV, WHO TV Channel 13, every day in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.